Hey, look, let me ask you something, actually, just speaking about that, because I was really surprised, not a commentary from me on good versus bad, that the births, deaths, marriages certificate bill that went through, whatever that was, the BD, whatever it is, that went through, was unanimous. When I
Yes,
saw
sorry,
that,
I was conflating the two, because conversion therapy is a conscience bill, I think. No, the birth, deaths, marriages registration bill did go through unanimously, and we were delighted about that.
Well, the reason I was surprised with that, as I say, not a commentary on whether it should or shouldn't have been, was whatever gets passed unanimously when it's about issues like, I guess gender and sex and sexuality and that kind of stuff, it seems that there are always one or two people who disagree. It was really surprising that it was unanimous. How did you guys react to that?
Oh, we were delighted. We're delighted because the signal that it sends is so strong. When we're talking about, a section of our community that has been systematically discriminated against kind of forever, and who, when you look at the statistics, have kind of terrible outcomes in terms of, incomes and health and, kind of anything really, any measures, actually being acknowledged, to be able to say, actually, you have the right to self-determination on that matter. I think it was a very, very strong signal. And so, yeah, we were delighted that it was unanimous.
I have one question around that, and I wasn't going to talk to you about this, but this is my one question, and I'm just trying to find the actual quote. Give me 10 seconds. All right, gender in there. Here we go. Anyway, we're going to do a debate on this. We've got some people who are going to have a conversation around it, because what it seems that that law, that bill has done, has now made the ability to self-identify sex be legal. Whereas up until that went through, I think the country as a whole, and maybe the world as a whole, understood about people self-identifying gender, but there's no gender. And even I was going to bring it up, one of your politicians who spoke out on it the next day talked about, and I didn't find the quote, but it talks about they have the right now to self-identify their gender on their birth certificate. Gender's not on a birth certificate. Sex is on a birth certificate. So what the government has done in that has changed the conversation from the previous 20 years, because it kind of used to be gender and sex was the same thing. And then we sort of decided that gender was a social construct and sex was biological. And then we kind of decided that sex was biological and gender was self-identifiable. And then at that point of the legislation, we've gone back to being gender and sex is the same thing again. And that's confusing to me, only because it's not gender. People keep talking about you can self-identify gender on the birth certificate. Gender's not on the birth certificate. It's self-identifying sex, which up until that day was the biological. Like I always used to think about sex being sex being the hardware and gender being the software. That sort of boy computer type term. But that changed it on that day, in that moment. That was another reason I was surprised it passed unanimously, because no one else seemed to pick up on the fact that you weren't voting on gender, even though everyone was talking about gender.
Yeah, well, so I had some interaction with this in the last term when I was Minister of Statistics, because one of the issues that we were facing with the government was essentially around gender and sex identification codes, for official statistics purposes. And you had some parts of government that find it very difficult to manage a situation where people can self-identify, because they kind of need drop-down menus and so on and so forth in order to sort of manage their data. But one of the things that we discovered, which is perhaps unsurprising, is that there's no shared language within government and between government agencies, and so we were using those terms themselves interchangeably across different parts of government. And so, I think you probably described it best yourself. There's sort of a journey that we're going on here in terms of our understanding, and our language hasn't wholly caught up with that. And in fact, the understanding itself is unevenly distributed. And so, that's kind of not wholly surprising. I think what's significant about the birth, deaths, marriages bill was that I think it probably helps to shift the whole conversation forward and our understanding forward sort of everywhere, you know. So I think, you know, in addition to providing some kind of hope and some recognition for people who are non-binary and want to be able to self-identify, that they have that option, it actually helps kind of more broadly to advance our overall understanding about matters like sex and gender and biology that often get conflated.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you said in that sentence what I have been saying for the last kind of 5 years around this conversation, which is we don't yet have the conversation to have this conversation properly. We don't have the language yet, because when you've got different parts of science saying the opposing things, like psychology saying one thing and physiology saying the opposite about sex and gender, how do we move forward? But I guess I sit here now and go, how do we pass legislation when we haven't actually nailed that down quite yet either? But I guess time will tell. What if
yeah, and in some ways you kind of have to force the issue sometimes by passing legislation, you know, you know, because otherwise you just kind of get stuck in this endless loop of, well, what about this, what about that, and you know, you've got a community of people who actually we need to do something for. So why don't we just kind of crack on with it, and you know, allow ourselves to evolve over time.